We continue to preview the NFL, getting you ready for the 2022 season. I'm joined now by my friend Landry Locker down in Houston. Sports Radio 610. Of course, he follows the Texans. Landry, thanks for the time, man. I appreciate you as always. General impression, I want to ask you about Texans fans, Landry, first, how they've handled the Deshaun Watson story from the beginning to right now. What's been the feedback to you guys, and how are fans feeling about the whole process over the last year plus?
It was a wild process. I would say at the beginning there was a little bit of shock. There was a little bit of denial. There was some anger. People disappointed, obviously, with how everything was going on. There was already resentment towards the organization because it was the worst-run organization over a 2-year period that you'll ever see. So there was some initial understanding of Deshaun. But as time kind of went on, I think people were just ready to get it over with. They wanted to get the best possible draft equity. I feel that given the situation, they feel that way. And now it's just kind of shifted to, let's see what you got with Davis Mills, and let's see what goes on. But, if you go as long as you did, as the Texans did, without having an elite quarterback, and then you feel like you have one for a few years, and then you feel like you're going to have that for a while and you lose it, there's just been a lot of emotions, and given just how unprecedented it was, I think you could basically list any emotion, and I'm sure that the fan base went through it in some way, shape, or form.
What was the reaction for the return? Once the deal was done, were fans generally happy with what they got back, or did they want more?
Initially, it seemed like he could have got more, but just given the fact that there was a no-trade clause, and given the fact that he basically got to pick where he wanted to go, and given the fact that, let's be honest, Cleveland tampered.
Yeah.
They agreed to that contract after they backed out. There's a reason that when the initial compensation was announced, afterwards, there were a couple of mid to late round picks sprinkled in. That was kind of like a self-inflicted tampering type thing, because Cleveland was already been told they were out, and then they made that $230 million guarantee. But 3 firsts was always what people wanted. I know if there were the no trade clause and there weren't the other stuff, then you probably would have gotten more. But I think there was pretty good satisfaction. But even then, if Deshaun Watson is a top 5, top 10 quarterback, chances are you probably gave up, or got back something that's not really gonna validate the return. But since he's been traded, it's gotten even worse for him. So the trade has looked even better, looked a lot better since when it was initially made.
Landry Locker with us from Sports Radio 610 down in Houston. All right, let's talk about the team now. You've all moved on from Deshaun Watson. What's the reaction, the vibe been, Landry, for Levy Smith getting another head coaching shot?
Well, I've been out there every day. We're going back out there today. Today was an off day. The vibes are a lot better right now than they were last year. I don't know that anyone thinks Levy Smith's the end-all, be-all, but from the beginning of when Levy Smith had his press conference, it just seemed to make sense for him to be the overseer in this situation. They were very close to hiring Josh McCown. I think they wanted to hire Josh McCown, and they kind of got bailed out with the Flores lawsuit, and they ended up hiring Levy. And initially, my initial reaction when it happened was, this is a bleep show. This is a joke. No one else would have hired Levy Smith. And that's true. No one else is going to hire Levy Smith to be their head coach. But with where the Texans are, the fact that they're in a startup, the fact they had David Coley last year, and that was a total disaster, it did feel right at the press conference. And he seems comfortable, and he seems like a coach that in this situation, with where they are, it just seems to fit. It just seems to be a good fit. So I think the fans are excited. The stands have been full, and it's 100 degrees out here, and that's on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. So the vibes are better, and it just seems to make sense.
All right, you can have a head coach. That head coach might be really good, but of course, it all depends on the quarterback. Davis Mills, can he be a legitimate QB1 in the NFL, Landry?
I think he can be one of those, I think he can get in a notch below the Kirk Cousins Garoppolo type tier, but maybe not as good as Kirk, because I think Kirk's actually pretty underrated. But I think Davis Mills has the tools, if he has the right stuff around him, to maybe be a mid-tier quarterback. I could see Davis Mills playing himself into a situation where he can hold it down next year. But as far as just being elite, I wouldn't bet on it. And I think in large part, like part of the optimism about Mills has as much to do with how bad the rookies were last year, as opposed to how good he is. But he's definitely going to be in the league for a while. I think he's at least going to be, like a backup for a long time. But I would say the ideal scenario for Davis Mills, he could be like an Andy Dalton if you have enough around him. I think he could be an Andy Dalton. But as far as, the quarterbacks in the AFC that we look at, I wouldn't bank on it, but I have been impressed with the guy. And we also have to keep in mind he was a third-round pick.
Right.
That's what's crazy. You get drafted, all of a sudden you're connected to Deshaun Watson, and it's like, well, he's not Deshaun Watson, darn. Well, it's not like you're the Jets with Zach Wilson and you don't know what the hell you got. You didn't invest a first-round pick. If a third-round pick is someone who's in the league for 10 years and can be a guy who can maybe be a spot starter or a backup, it's a good pick. So you kind of have to channel your expectations when it comes to Mills.
Landry Locker from Sports Radio 610 with us here, Cattles and Ramie, Sactown Sports 1140. No Ramie, just Cattles. I know the Mechie loss, obviously, that was some tough news, on the human side, first of all, and then secondly, football side. But when you look at the offense outside of Mills, biggest concern for you, Landry?
Wide receiver depth. I mean, you just nailed it. And running back. Although there's a little more optimism at running back right now, but the wide receiver depth. Last year, Brandon Cooks had 90 catches. The second leading receiver was Nico Collins. He had 33. So I mean, that's a 57 catch gap right there. And if you look at the depth chart after those two, you have Chris Conley. They just brought in Chester Rogers, and they have Philip Dorsett. So they have a bunch. They don't have a lot of depth at receiver. Tight ends were a big disappointment last year. Both of those guys have basically come out and said we were fat and out of shape. Pharaoh Brown and Brevin Jordan, and they're looking good. You can kind of see that they're a little bit better. Running back's been a problem for a long time. They like people's scraps. Rex Burkhead led the team in rushing last year. That's the first time that's happened in his NFL career, and he didn't even break 500. But they do have Damian Pierce, and they do have Marlon Mack from the Colts. They look okay, the running backs, but if you just ask me the biggest concern, after Brandon Cooks, there's a lot of concern at wide receiver. And after Nico Collins, it's a real disaster.
They added some youth on the defensive end through the draft. Expectations on that side of the ball?
Those guys look like studs. That's the one thing that I will say. Jalen Petrie, Levy Smith's already named him a starter, and he did so, day 3 of camp. So that tells you how he feels about the safety out of Baylor that they got in the second round. Derek Stingley, when he's out there, he just looks different. I mean, he just looks completely different. It's easy to see how he had the season that he did at LSU. And he's moving around well. They even got him like fielding punts and kicks. I don't think he's going to be the starter there, but I could see him like in some spot duty, returning punts. But he's just got guys on lock. Obviously, rookie corners are going to struggle, but he looks good. Christian Harris actually is injured. Not sure how long he's going to be out, but he was looking good before. But as far as like the defense, the guys that they added, especially in the secondary, they look very legit.
Last one for you, Landry. Got about 30 here. Reasonable win-loss kind of expectations for this team?
I'll say 5 or 6 would be the reasonable, and quite honestly, with where we are around here, that probably wouldn't be the worst thing because you got two first-round picks next year. You're kind of rebuilding. 5 or 6 would be the realistic, but you know how the NFL is. It just takes an injury with someone else in the division, and then who knows what happens. But I would, if I were betting right now, I would probably say 6 wins.
Thanks, Landry. As always, man, I appreciate you. Have fun down there. Talk soon.
All right, my friend.
See you. There goes Landry Locker, Sports Radio 610, does a great job down there and their midday program. I've talked to Landry for a number of years. Started in Dallas, now in Houston, does some great stuff. So, look, I think he nailed it with Davis Mills, and it goes directly back to my comments about Trey Lance last segment. Like, it's all about expectation level. Well, Trey Lance is not a gamble as QB1 when you draft him 3rd overall. Davis Mills, 3rd-round pick, that's a gamble. Going into a season with that guy as your QB1 is a gamble. Not the 3rd pick overall. And 5 or 6 wins sounds about right. And, of course, as Landry said, for that organization, that'll give them the opportunity to possibly bring in the next QB1.